Over the last few years, the Ole Miss Rebels have produced a lot of good wide receivers. You had guys such as Laquan Treadwell and DK Metcalf, and you also had A.J. Brown and most recently Elijah Moore. Those four guys will go down as some of the best receivers in Ole Miss history, and three of them have had pretty decent NFL careers so far. The subject of today's video was always seen as the next great Rebel receiver, and after a slow start to his career, really turned it on his last season, and now was one of the top receivers taken in this year's draft, could be Bryce Young's #1 weapon, and has a really high ceiling in the NFL. In today's video, I want to talk about Jonathan Mingo, where to go through who he is, why he's such a great fit for the Panthers, how his Ole Miss career went, and why he could be the steal of the draft. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you love college football content, let me know what topic I should do next, and turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now, let's get started and talk about Jonathan Mingo. So going back in time, Mingo grew up about 15 miles outside of Jackson, Mississippi, and family and faith were always super important to him. If you lived in that household, you were going to church. His father, John, played football at Jackson State back in the day, but Jonathan had a different school that he fell in love with. He grew up a huge fan of the Georgia Bulldogs and dreamed of one day playing between the hedges like his favorite player A.J. Green did. Mingo grew up playing both soccer and baseball and didn't start playing football seriously until he was in middle school. He was actually a quarterback in 4th grade. Mingo was really good, and he made a bold proclamation in middle school to his brother that he wanted to play professionally. It wasn't a question so much as a declaration, and his brother knew that Jonathan was really far behind, and it was going to take a lot of effort outside of what was required if he was going to make up all that ground. So when Jonathan got to high school, he started doing his push-ups and sit-ups and lived in the weight room. At one point, he was neighbors with future NFL linebacker Demario Davis, and football was apparently a big deal in that town, as he wasn't the only guy either, and he grew up with future SEC superstar quarterback Will Rogers. They formed a deep friendship, and for years they worked together. Will said, quote, "We were probably throwing 2 or 3 times per week. After church, we were up at the football field. There were no ifs, ands, or buts about it. On Sundays, we were out there." One story in particular was really awesome, as on prom night, the two were throwing footballs at the local stadium. Will's father said, quote, "Someone called and reported the kids on the field, and with it being prom night, you can imagine the principal was pretty nervous. So I jumped in my truck and got up there, and it was Will and Mingo up there working out. They were throwing and catching, and that was about as far as either of them ever bent the rules." It ended up paying off, as Rogers became the starting quarterback as a sophomore in high school, and both him and Mingo became an incredible duo, connecting on hundreds of passes and dozens of touchdowns over 2 years. As a senior in 2018, Jonathan would catch 77 passes for 1,451 yards and 14 touchdowns. He helped Brandon High School get to a 13-2 record in the Class 6A state semifinals. His head coach said, quote, "Jonathan's a perfectionist. He never settles, he never coasts. He's never going to be satisfied with anything less than his best." He became one of the top wide receivers in high school football and was a fast riser that everyone wanted, including his dream school. He said, quote, "Georgia's always been my favorite growing up. When I first got up there, I tried on the jerseys and toured the football facilities a little bit, and after that, it was practice, and then spent time with Coach Hankton one-on-one. That's when he extended an offer to me. It was exciting because it was an offer I'd always wanted. I grew up watching A.J. Green a lot. He's my favorite player, and that's how Georgia became my favorite team." Well, where would he go? It wouldn't end up being the Bulldogs, as he chose the Rebels over Georgia, Auburn, and Mississippi State. He said, quote, "Ole Miss and Mississippi State recruited me the hardest, but Ole Miss was there the most. They're the ones who wanted me the most badly, and staying home would be nice, and I decided to make that move." That's what he ended up doing, and Mingo looked at the team's roster and offensive scheme, and also factored in playing time, and that's why Ole Miss made a lot of sense. He's also a standout guy, and one story in particular stood out to me. One game during their senior year, Mingo caught a screen pass and was tackled prematurely due to one of his fellow receivers missing a block. Mingo came over to the sideline and approached their head coach. He wasn't angry at the missed opportunity or frustrated at his teammate, but instead asked if he could be the blocker on the next play. The next time they ran it, Jonathan blocked and the other kid ran all the way for a touchdown. Jonathan was already committed to Ole Miss and had the stats and the status, so he wanted his teammate to do well. According to 24/7 Sports, Mingo was a 4-star recruit, the number 32 wide receiver, and the 216th best player in the class of 2019. So, how would he end up doing in Oxford? When Mingo arrived to Ole Miss in 2019, they'd have 2 quarterbacks in both Matt Corral and John Rice Plumlee, and were under head coach Matt Luke. Expectations weren't super high, and as a freshman, Mingo would catch 12 passes for 172 yards and a touchdown. Mingo would end up taking on a bigger role in 2020 as he finished with 27 catches for 379 yards and 3 touchdowns. He ended up becoming that third guy behind both Elijah Moore and Dontario Drummond. Moore became one of the best receivers in the country, and Drummond seemingly was Corral's second favorite option. The same would pretty much be said in 2021. Drummond would end up being the breakout receiver for them, and Mingo ended up finishing with 22 catches for 346 yards and 3 scores. Unfortunately, leading up to practice against Alabama, he ended up suffering a stress fracture in his foot and would miss the next 7 games of the season before returning to action against Vanderbilt in late November. After Drummond left, he was the next guy up. There had been A.J. Brown and DK, then Elijah Moore, and now, well, everyone was looking to Mingo. Last year, he'd end up starting out really strong. He had 3 catches for 26 yards against Troy, and then went over the 100-yard mark against Central Arkansas. He had 3 catches for 74 yards in a win over Georgia Tech, and then had his first touchdown of the season against Tulsa. He was limited against Kentucky with only 1 catch, but then he'd have one of the most insane performances over the last few years. Against Vanderbilt, he ended up catching 9 passes for 247 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mingo had an absolutely insane game and broke the all-time single-game record for receiving yards in a game. He passed up Elijah Moore. He said, quote, "I had a talk with Elijah in the offseason about how I was going to try and break his record. It was cool to have it happen." At the time, Pro Football Focus actually graded him as the #1 receiver through 6 weeks with an 87.8 ranking. Patience would end up paying off for him as he said, quote, "God put me through a lot of places and just telling me to be patient. It was a hard thing because I had surgery last year around this time, and I had it again in April to make sure everything would be straight during this year." Mingo would end up finishing the year strong as he did 4 catches for 68 yards against LSU, 4 for 89 and a touchdown in a win over Texas A&M, and then he had 7 catches for 59 yards and a touchdown in a loss to Alabama. He was also productive against Arkansas, and then in his final Egg Bowl would catch 7 passes for 40 yards and a narrow 2-point loss. Ole Miss would end up getting off to a 6-0 start, before they'd lose a couple more, but they would still get to play in a bowl game against Texas Tech. In that game, he'd end up catching 3 passes for 53 yards, and that would be the final game of his career. Mingo finished with 51 receptions for 861 yards and 5 touchdowns, with 1 more rushing touchdown along the way. Those numbers don't really pop off the page that much, but he was Ole Miss's second leading receiver, and he always had a lot of potential. He ended up spending 4 years in Oxford, reeling in 112 receptions for 1,758 yards and 12 touchdowns. He ended up declaring for the 2023 NFL Draft and did really well at the Combine. He had great athleticism as he ran a 4.46 40-yard dash and had the second most reps of all wideouts with 22. For a while, he was seen as a day 2 to day 3 selection, but recently he started to blow up. Within the final week before the 2023 NFL Draft, some were talking about him working his way into the end of the first round. Personally, I don't even remember seeing that, and I never really understood the hype. As I've done more digging, I understand why scouts were high on him. Why was it? It was because of his pro day. He said, quote, "I did better than people thought I was going to do. I knew once my body got healthy, I knew I could do fast times, and I showed I can run the whole route tree. The Combine was easy, and at the Ole Miss Pro Day, I did good cone drills, and I've been running routes my whole life." Mingo would end up being the 5th wide receiver taken in the 2023 NFL Draft after 4 straight were taken in the first round. He ended up going number 39 overall to the Carolina Panthers, and this was a shock to some who thought he was a 3rd-round pick. Personally, I remember seeing him get drafted, and I thought it was a little bit of a reach, but now I'm really sold on him, and I think he has a chance to have a role early on with the Panthers. He's going to come in and play alongside both DJ Chark and Adam Thielen, and while those 2 guys will probably be ahead of him on the pecking order, he could become Bryce Young's #1 option, and definitely has a lot of untapped potential to live up to. He's pretty much the prototypical physical specimen for a wide receiver in today's NFL, and with the proper coaching and a good quarterback, Mingo could have a long career. I'm really excited to see what he's going to do on the Panthers this upcoming season. He has a great story, and I think will be someone we all get to know pretty soon. But what do you guys think? If you're an Ole Miss fan or a Panthers fan, what do you think of Jonathan Mingo? Who's another player who has a great story I can cover next? And before you go, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.